let's look at the highlights and the lowlights. Once again, it's time for another top and bottom 5 video, and on the chopping block this time is Season 6. I found this to be a more consistent and enjoyable season than Season 5. It was incredibly difficult to narrow down my 5 favorites out of the episodes that we've gotten, and it was also a challenge to not only pick out episodes for the bottom 5, but also decide the order. Because while there were a couple episodes I disliked, none of them really evoked any strong negative feelings from me, except for maybe one exception, but we'll get to that. You guys know how these lists work by now, so let's just get into it. Starting with the honorable mentions. Viva Las Pegasus, 28 Pranks Later, and The Times They Are a Changeling were all great episodes. I wish I could have put them in the top 5, but there just wasn't enough room. And my one dishonorable mention goes to On Your Marks.
Yay!
For the longest time, Inspiration Manifestation was my favorite Spike episode, as it had him solve his own problem without help from someone else. But Gauntlet of Fire stepped it up by not only having him rise to a challenge that Season 1 Spike would have backed out on, but also showing a potential change in the mentality of the dragons. Really looking forward to where he goes from here. I would have put The Times They Are a Changeling in this spot, but you know, bullshit song is bullshit song.
Boo!
Honestly, how many times does the story of A Christmas Carol need to be rehashed? Not only was this yet another retelling of an overused story, but it didn't even come out around the holidays, so what was even the point? I know some will say that the lesson of the story is still an important one to teach, but they could have written an original story to teach it instead of going with one that's been used more times than my Auntie Kayla.
Hey, that's my mom you're talking about!
Yay!
Warning. The following segment contains positive comments about Starlight Glimmer. If such subject matter offends you in any way, please leave now. Viewer discretion is advised. While I have my criticisms here and there, I enjoyed Starlight's arc in Season 6. Between the 3, technically 4 episodes that make up this arc, I'm not sure which one I like the best, and if this were a top 10 best episodes list, they'd all be on it. So since the episodes are so closely related to one another and represent an overall narrative, I'm counting the entire arc as my number 4 best spot. I really enjoyed watching Starlight navigate through the process of gaining friends and learning to trust them and herself instead of relying on her magic as a crutch. And because she's had that crutch for so long, I'm not all that surprised that the journey had this many bumps in the road. It's got me genuinely interested in her as a character after being really wary about her prior to this season.
Boo!
Everyone and their mother has put the cart before the ponies on their worst list, and there really aren't any reasons I can say that haven't been run into the ground at this point. The only thing I really can say is that the problems I have with this episode don't bother me as much as the later entries do.
Yay!
Once Rarity got her boutique in Canterlot, a lot of fans wondered what else there was for her to do. I never really understood why, since it seemed pretty obvious to me. She began building a franchise, so now she's expanding it. I really liked the framing device used for the Saddle Row review, since it allowed for some great jokes, and that, along with the chaos that ensued in trying to get the boutique ready for its opening, made for one of the funniest episodes of the series.
Boo!
The Gift of the Mod Pie sounded like a good episode on paper, especially with the potential for some great Mod and Rarity interactions, but it ends up falling short on that, and wasn't all that entertaining or funny. And with a much better story coming out shortly after, this episode only looks worse by comparison.
Yay!
My main concern for Season 6 was that the development Fluttershy got in the previous season would be reverted, but Flutter Brother not only retained that growth, but also shows her utilizing a lot of the previous lessons she's learned so she can help her brother. Speaking of whom, I actually like Zephyr Breeze. Or rather, I like his story. He's a barely tolerable guy, but by the end you start to see at least some progress. And if he does show up in Season 7, it will be great to see what he's doing with himself. With Fluttershy being such a stagnant character in the first 4 seasons, having this episode feature her help someone out of that same state is not only a great way for her to come full circle, but a testament to how far she's come since her debut. And it would have been number 1 if it weren't for that god-awful song at the end.
Boo!
The Crystalling is probably... scratch that. Definitely my least favorite premiere of the series. On its own, it's okay. Flurry Heart is cute and Celestia and Luna are actually doing stuff, but as a premiere, I just don't think that it had the sense of tension that other premieres had, even the ones that I didn't like. You could say that it was trying a different approach, but season 5 did that too, and it still felt like a premiere. The mystery behind Starlight's town and the secrets that unraveled kept me invested. With this, while there was a clear threat approaching, the episode doesn't really treat it with the urgency that said threat would warrant. I feel that a premiere should get me excited for what the rest of the season will bring, and the crystalling failed to do that for me. Honestly, the only highlight of this episode is that Twilight Velvet finally got a speaking role. And my number 1 worst episode of season 6 is Stranger Than Fanfiction. You know, I actually had this episode as my number 2 in the bottom 5 when I originally drafted the list, but the entire time I was scripting its entry, I kept thinking to myself, why the hell isn't this number 1? Because while the crystalling was an underwhelming episode, at the end of the day, that's all I felt. Underwhelmed. This episode, on the other hand, actively annoyed me, and it was mainly because of Quibble Pants. A story about fans accepting differences between each other is all well and good. In fact, it's a very important lesson that we all should take to heart. But the problem with Quibble Pants isn't that he has a different opinion. It's that he acts like a total know-it-all about his opinions to the point of ignoring the fact that he's literally about to die. And unfortunately, with the type of character Rainbow Dash is, she easily fell into the void of bickering with someone that can only complain without even articulating where their criticisms are coming from. And that's the real kicker. Quibble doesn't actually say why he has his problems with the later Daring Do books until the very end, which makes you wonder why you had to endure 20 minutes of his verbal diarrhea when he could have made this clear from the very beginning. The lesson implies that it's both Dash and Quibble that need to learn to accept each other, but it's contradicted by everything that comes before it because it made Quibble so insufferable. It's almost like the episode wanted you to be against him.
Wait a minute, you defended Zephyr for being a character you're supposed to dislike? What makes Quibble any different?
The difference is that Zephyr's negative qualities, while annoying, originated from a sympathetic trait, and by the end you can see an effort to better himself. Quibble is just an obnoxious jackass for the sake of being an obnoxious jackass, even when there's something infinitely more important and potentially life-threatening going on. Yeah, the idea of a character not realizing the danger they're in is an opportunity for some great humor, but by the time that idea is introduced, I'm already so annoyed by Quibble that I don't even care that he's in danger. I just wanted to shut the hell up.
Well, maybe it's supposed to be a portrayal of the analysis community.
If it was, it would be a very poor one, because most people, even in the analysis community, don't go to conventions to argue about the show. They go to conventions to, have fun, and even a glancing look at the various vlogs of different conventions would tell you that. Stranger Than Fanfiction is an episode that is not only a chore to sit through, but an episode that contradicts itself in the message it's trying to convey. Yeah, I shouldn't dislike you for having a different opinion. In fact, I welcome it. But you know what I can dislike you for? Being an insufferable brat. And my number 1 best episode of season 6 is Where the Apple Lies. My prayers have been answered. For the longest time, I've been waiting for a new Best Applejack episode. And honestly, if Viva Las Pegasus was the only AJ story we've got, I would have accepted that as a consolation since she was great in that story. But then Where the Apple Lies came along and blew me away. The humor was on point and I loved the back and forth between AJ and Big Mac. And by the end of it all, I wanted to watch it again. Not only was this episode hilarious, but it also makes you see why AJ is so adamant against lying and why Big Mac prefers to only talk when he absolutely needs to. It's more than just a funny episode. It's my favorite Applejack episode and my favorite of season 6. So, with this season in the bag, I'm looking forward to what season 7 will bring us. While I prefer not to walk in with any expectations, I do hope that it will be as consistent, entertaining, and funny as this season was. So what are your top and bottom 5 of season 6? Swarm that comment section below or bug me on social media. And consider supporting me through Patreon or PayPal art commissions. Until next time, keep it sketchy, folks.